I recently did a barbecue tour in Austin, Texas, and I visited some of the best barbecue joints in the world, including Franklin Barbecue, Interstellar Barbecue, La Barbecue, and many more. And while I ate some of the best brisket I've ever eaten in my life that was super juicy and delicious, I honestly, barbecue Jesus forgive me, found it a little bit dry. Whoa, what does that mean? How can something be juicy and delicious and still be dry? And how do we fix it? That's what this video is about, and while it's gonna be a controversial video, it's also gonna make you a better brisket cook. So let's get smoking. So what is a perfect brisket anyway, and what goes into cooking one that's not dry? Well, cooking a perfect Texas-style brisket is complicated because you're really cooking three different substances. You're cooking the collagen, you're cooking the muscle fibers, and you're cooking the fat. And cooking one of these substances to perfection often results in over or undercooking one or both of the other substances. Very few people realize this, and they focus on things like time, temperature, probe tenderness, or the feel of the brisket without understanding how all of these indicia of doneness relate to each other. The result is that they get a disappointing brisket, they don't understand what went wrong, and they think that cooking a perfect brisket is some kind of magic. Well, it isn't, it's just a gap in our understanding, one that I am going to attempt to fill for you now. Let's start with collagen. It's the honeycomb of interconnective tissue that holds the muscle fibers tightly together. In its perfectly cooked state, it's soft, rendered with just a tiny bit of elasticity that breaks apart easily when you bite into a slice. This is an example of perfectly rendered collagen on a point slice I had from Style Switch Barbecue in Austin. If it was undercooked, the brisket slice would feel like a tight elastic when you try to pull it apart, and if it was overcooked, the slice would just fall apart. Not so with this slice because the pitmaster gave it enough time to render and pulled it off the cooker before it got overcooked. Now, perfectly cooking collagen is a matter of time as well as temperature. I go over this concept in another video that I'll link over here, but for this video, I'll go over a brief example to illustrate the concept. Let's say you cook two briskets all the way up to 190 degrees Fahrenheit internal. It takes about 10 to 12 hours. And then the first brisket, you raise the temperature of the smoker, maybe up to 300 degrees Fahrenheit, and you just let that brisket increase in temperature all the way up to 203, 205 degrees Fahrenheit for the next hour until it probes tender and it's done. Pretty typical way to cook a brisket. But with the other brisket, as soon as it hits 190 at, say, the 12-hour mark, you remove it from the smoker, you put it in an oven that is holding a steady 190 degrees Fahrenheit, and you hold the internal temperature at 190 degrees Fahrenheit for about 4 hours. So that brisket takes longer to get probe tender, but it holds at 190 and it gets to the same probe tenderness as the one we took all the way up to 205. Now, the collagen in both briskets are equally perfectly cooked. So why don't we just go with the method that's faster? We saved 3 hours of cooking time with the one we took up to 205. Well, that takes us to talking about muscle fibers. Muscle fibers do not like being taken to high temperatures. The higher the temperature that the muscle fiber gets to, the more that the cells within those fibers become denatured, they burst, they lose a lot of moisture and water retention capabilities, and they become more and more dry until they basically crumble and fall apart. So in the example we just talked about, the brisket that we took up to 207 degrees Fahrenheit, the muscle fibers within that brisket will be dry, they'll taste pot roasty, they'll be flavorless because the brisket has lost so much water. Whereas the one we only held at 190 for 4 hours will retain a lot of its steaky, prime ribby, moist flavor, and it will still taste like beef, and it'll have a better texture because it's retaining more moisture. Here's an experiment I did to illustrate this concept using an eye of round, which is an extremely lean cut of beef. The muscle fibers in this cut are similar to the muscle fibers in a brisket, but we've removed the fat and collagen from the picture so we can focus on what is happening to the muscle tissue by itself. I sliced the roast into 3 chunks, which I weighed and recorded. Then I placed each one in a foil pan and gently cooked them until they reached different internal temperatures. Roast number 1 was removed when it reached 190 degrees internal. Roast number 2 was removed when it reached 203 degrees internal, and roast number 3 was taken all the way up to 207 degrees plus internal. Now, roast number 1 lost the least amount of moisture by weight, with a 34% moisture loss. You can see how the grains of the meat are tighter, they're more like steak or prime rib in texture, and they look visibly more juicy and well hydrated. This would be my idea of the perfect muscle fiber texture for a brisket. Roast number 2 lost 41% of its moisture, and you can see how the grains are starting to become more defined. They fall apart more easily, and they just look more dry. This is what most brisket muscle fibers look like when they're taken up to 200 degrees plus, which is most briskets that people cook. And finally, roast number 3 also lost 41% of its moisture, same as roast number 2, but you can see that it is very overcooked, and the graininess and pot roastiness is even more apparent. This would be like a very overcooked brisket that was taken up to 207 degrees plus and basically just crumbles apart. Now, the difference between 34% and 41% don't seem very pronounced, but if we assume that we have a 12-pound brisket, that's actually 382 grams of additional moisture that's lost by going above 190 and taking a brisket all the way up to 200 degrees plus. That is this much water. That's all the way up to here. Oh. That is a lot of water, and that's a lot of water that is not getting into your mouth when you take a brisket above 190. And that's what I'm talking about when I say that briskets taken above 190 are drier. They are literally drier. They have less water in them. To make things even more complicated, there's another variable in the mix, and that is fat. There's intramuscular fat, and there's the fat cap on top of the brisket. Similar to collagen, fat needs either time or temperature or both to fully render. If you get the collagen perfectly cooked, you'll probably nail the intramuscular fat, but not necessarily the fat cap. A perfect Texas-style brisket has a soft, squishy fat cap that melts in your mouth, and most of it should be yellowish brown on the top layer of the fat cap. Kind of like how when you fry up bacon, you get that crispy yellow caramelized color fat that tastes amazing. That's what we're going after in the outer part of the fat cap for a Texas-style brisket. And to get that, we require not only higher internal temperatures in the brisket, but also a higher smoker temperature. Just like bacon needs a hot pan to get crispy, the fat cap starts rapidly turning that brownish yellow color when the brisket passes 190 internal, and the smoker temperature is around 280 or higher. Now that you're armed with the knowledge, let's talk about what Texas barbecue restaurants are getting right and what they're getting wrong. The Texas restaurants and pitmasters that I have deified and venerated and highly respect, I'm about to give my criticism, my hot take on the matter, and that is going to require a wee dram of scotch, one that I'm going to enjoy while talking about the sponsor for this video, Established Titles. If you're looking for a gift for family members with Scottish heritage, or really anyone who just loves Scottish culture, you can make them a Scottish lord or lady and get them a cool certificate that shows it. It's based on a real Scottish custom where if you own land in Scotland, you are considered a lord or a lady. So if you buy as little as 1 square foot of land from Established Titles, you or your friend or family member can be a lord or lady, and you can do some really cool stuff with it, like putting your title on your plane ticket, your credit card, or even your dating profile. A title pack gives you at least 1 square foot of dedicated land on a private estate in Edelston, Scotland, and an official certificate with a unique plot number showing the exact location of your plot. They even plant a tree with every order and work with global charities One Tree Planted and Trees for the Future to support global reforestation efforts and reforestation in Scotland. I gave one to both my dad and my brother, who are really proud of our Scottish heritage, and they absolutely loved it and they hung it on their wall. It's really great to see.
Now, your grandmother was born in Motherwell, Scotland, so she would have enjoyed this.
It makes an amazing last-minute gift for 1 or more people, and you can even get a couples pack with plots right next to each other. And speaking of plots right next to each other, Established Titles told me the first 200 people who purchase a title pack using my link will effectively be right next to my plot of land, or within a few minutes of walking. Depending on how many of you want to become a lord or lady, we can build our own little Smoke Trails barbecue kingdom. And now is the perfect time to buy a title pack because Established Titles is running a massive early Black Friday sale right now. Plus, if you use the code STBBQ, you can get an additional 10% off. So go to establishedtitles.com/STBBQ to get your gifts now and help support the channel. And now that we're all Scottish lords, let us recite the old Scottish grace. Some have meat but cannot eat, and some have none that want it. But we have meat and we can eat, and barbecue Jesus be thank it. And please forgive me for what I'm about to say. So what most barbecue restaurants do is they cook their briskets around 12 to 14 hours at a lower temperature. Some wrap sooner, some wrap later, some wrap in paper, some wrap in foil, some use tallow, some don't. There's a bunch of different techniques, but in most cases, they raise smoker temperatures later in the cook to fully render that fat cap. Then they check for doneness and remove the briskets to holding ovens until service, usually the next day. The result is that the collagen is perfectly cooked, the fat is perfectly rendered, and the fat cap is also perfectly rendered. But the muscle fibers are a real wild card. If they are lucky or they're intentionally pulling briskets off the smoker at a lower temperature and letting the long hold finish them, that meat will be perfect because they didn't go to a high finishing temperature. But in most cases, it's overcooked, especially in the flat. That doesn't really matter though to the average consumer because a lot of these restaurants use extremely high quality meat with a lot of fat. And all that fat and rendered collagen, which turns into gelatin, it gives the perception of extreme juiciness and masks the dryness of the meat itself. Many restaurants also slather slices in tallow, which makes them taste even more juicy. Here's an example from Franklin Barbecue. The point slice was absolutely amazing.
Here very well, but it's fine. Wait, I have to do this way, right?
Yeah.
Oh, shit.
Oh my god, I'm so excited for this. Okay. Is it hard a little bit? Like...
Now, even though the point slice was amazing, once I cooled down the flat and put it in a refrigerator and took it out and pulled it apart, you can see how dry it is. It just kind of crumbles apart in the flat. And here's another example from La Barbecue in Austin.
The brisket is really well cooked. The flat was, it was a little bit dry and crumbly, and you can tell they sliced it a little bit thicker as a result, but it was good. But the point was amazing. The point was buttery and flavorful. It was fully rendered, and it almost tasted like they added butter to it or something. I don't know for sure, but there was something extra that I couldn't really tell that wasn't really the flavor of tallow. It was more the flavor of butter.
So you could see that the flat looks pretty dry and crumbly, but the point was absolutely amazing because it had so much fat and rendered collagen, and it was slathered in tallow and maybe something else. So why do Texas barbecue restaurants cook brisket the way they do? Why don't they just cook their brisket like I do and never go above 190 and let the long hold in the holding oven finish the brisket so that the muscle fibers don't get dried out? Well, there's several potential reasons. A lot of it comes down to scale, efficiency, and consistency. It's easy for me to baby a brisket at home to perfection when I'm only cooking one brisket, but when you're cooking hundreds of briskets a day that are all finishing at different temperatures and being put into the holding ovens at different times, it's very hard to stay consistent and keep that meat below the 190 temperature zone. There's also fat rendering to consider. Texans expect perfectly rendered fat caps. It's just an expectation in Texas barbecue. And in order to get those perfectly rendered fat caps, you often need to take brisket to a higher temperature, and you need to use higher temperatures in the smoker. Also, as the old saying in barbecue goes, over is better than under. A person could eat an overcooked brisket and they could rave that it's the best barbecue they've ever eaten in their life, but if they eat the same brisket that is undercooked, they will never go to that barbecue restaurant again. So sometimes there's just too much risk in trying to perfectly cook the muscle fibers of that brisket. And finally, we have to consider that people just plain old might like it that way. This is my opinion in this video, and while I might like a medium rare steak, for example, some people like medium well or well done. It just might be that a lot of people's preference is that grainy, kind of crumbly texture, and my preference just so happens to be a more prime ribby, juicy texture that's finished at a lower temperature. So is Texas brisket really dry? Well, yes and no. The dominant methods that most Texas barbecue restaurants use tend to produce drier results as far as the muscle tissue is concerned. As far as the entire brisket is concerned, with the fat and the collagen, the brisket is amazing and fall apart and juicy and tender tender, and it's the best brisket you've ever tasted in your life. It's just a little bit drier in the muscle fibers. There's also probably Texas barbecue restaurants out there that are using methods that don't involve overcooking the muscle fibers. And many of the briskets coming off the pits at restaurants using the conventional methods are perfectly cooked as well, either by luck or through skill. What do I mean by luck? Well, my best bite of brisket in Texas was the point slice at Interstellar Barbecue. The point was perfect. It was beefy, it was prime ribby, it was moist, the meat was perfectly cooked, the collagen and fat was perfectly rendered. Everything was perfect. When I tried the flat slices, they were undercooked and I had to struggle to pull them apart. And that's likely why the point was perfectly cooked. The point cooks faster than the flat in an offset because you're getting top-down heat and the point is on top. So they probably pulled this brisket out a little bit too early for the flat to finish, but that luckily resulted in the point being perfectly cooked, for my taste anyway. So let's talk about the solution. How do we fix this problem? The answer is simple. Just don't go above 190 degrees internal. That's the name of the game. When I started going by that rule, then the questions shifted in my mind. If I can't go above 190, then how do I fully render the fat cap and get that caramelized dark bark? How do I get that bark super jet black dark with less time in the smoker? How do I fully render the collagen without the high internal temperatures of the brisket? Well, the answer is just to ramp up the temperatures after the brisket starts sweating. So once it hits maybe 140 to 160, we can gradually increase our temperatures in our smoker all the way up to around 300, even going as high as 325 near the end of the cook, to really hit that fat cap with top-down heat to render it before it hits 190. If you're using a smoker that cooks from below, we can think about how to block the heat below it and get it up to the fat cap where it needs to be. Put a water pan under the brisket so the heat goes up and around it, or use a foil boat to protect the underside. And finally, how do we get darker bark in a shorter time? Well, just don't wrap during the cook. Leave the bark exposed all the way up to 190 degrees internal, either fully unwrapped or in a foil boat. Either way works. But the big question is, does this need fixing? I've mentioned before that people have different tastes, and we should keep in mind that some people might just like that texture of brisket that a lot of barbecue restaurants produce. I call it drier, but they'll call it more falling apart in your mouth and more luxurious and tastier and better than the texture that I prefer when briskets aren't taken above 190 degrees internal. The point of this video is I just want to arm you to be a better brisket connoisseur and to notice the difference. So when you eat the best brisket on earth, you can spot the differences and form your own educated opinion. Now, I wanted to mention that the barbecue restaurants that I talked about in these videos are some of the finest barbecue joints on earth. I have a tremendous amount of respect for the pit masters and the owners and all of the people that work at these restaurants. They produce amazing barbecue and they are really dedicated to providing you with the best barbecue experience of your life. I highly recommend that you go to all of them because they're amazing, and there's a reason that I went to them, because they are on the Texas top 50, or they are highly respected barbecue restaurants. So I hope you guys enjoyed this video. If you guys like to nerd out on brisket science and all things barbecue related, then consider joining my Patreon page. I'll link it in the description section below. We've got a great community there, and we all talk to each other on a private chat channel on Discord, so you'll have direct access to the community and to me to answer all of your barbecue related questions. I hope to see you there, and I'll definitely see you in the next video. Happy smoking.